Okay. Miriam?
You're on live.
Okay, well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Portuguese Elections Monitor. My name is Javier Carbonell. I'm a policy analyst at the European Policy Center. We host these events after every major European election, and we deal with what has happened and what to expect in the future of the election and of the country. So these are the third elections in 3 years in Portugal, which gives you already an idea of the political instability that the country has been suffering over the past years. And the results have been quite interesting, quite far a bit from what we were expecting. So the ruling centre-right coalition, Democratic Alliance, remained the strongest political force in Portugal, with 32% of the vote. However, interestingly, both the Socialist and the far-right party Chega have been tied in seats for the second place. The Socialists are just a couple of decimals of percentage ahead in vote share, but basically they have 58 seats, both of them. So of course, this indicates that Portugal kind of is copying the tripartite classification between socialist, center-right, and far-right as these three big fields of political parties that is happening in other European countries. Of course, this has important implications for the inclusion of the far right, what is going to happen in the government, and what's going to happen to the political stability of Portugal. To answer all of these questions and analyze the elections, we have two fantastic speakers. So in the first place, we have Susana Frexes, which is EU correspondent for SIC TV and Expresso, and Vicente Valentim, who's assistant professor of political science at IE University and author of the book The Normalization of the Far Right. So the way this event will go is that we will start with a couple of questions to the speakers on what has happened, what to expect, and how this will affect the EU and kind of broader implications of these elections. And then we will open the floor for anyone who wants to make a question. Please feel free to write any question at any point. You can start writing your questions now, so do not wait until the very end. This event will just last around an hour, so it will be short but intense and fun. So please join us in welcoming the two speakers. I'm going to get right to it. Okay, so let's start with the election results. What has happened? I'm going to start with you, Susana. So what were the key issues and narratives that defined the election campaign, right? So, of course, they were cold because Prime Minister Montenegro had this scandal regarding this Spinum Viva company. But this hasn't seemed that has damaged his image, quite the opposite. So how can we read the results and the campaign?
Hello, hi to you all. Thanks for the invitation, first of all. So it's true, Montenegro did survive to Spinum Viva scandal, at least for the time being, because it was, this is one of his maybe smart moves. So he tried to survive all this scandal by calling elections, or at least putting his government to non-confidence vote, and in the end, of course, the government collapsed. And it was a risky move, but it seems to, at least for the time being, it paid off in the sense that it did win some extra seats, so we did lose the elections. I'm not sure the scandal is over yet, in the sense that, for instance, we see even the far-right party Chega saying that it might still push forward an inquiry commission in the parliament. And it was this inquiry commission that he was trying to escape by calling or pushing forward for elections. Also, we don't know what the next socialist leader is going to do, but it's also a possibility that the socialists push forward for this, because, to be honest, I do think that there are some questions regarding Spinum Viva and this mix between politics and business that is still to be answered, but let's see what's going to happen. But it's true that if Montenegro was trying to be cleared out by by the voters, by the Portuguese, he has some arguments here, and he definitely yesterday when he reacted, he made clear that this is what the Portuguese want. They don't really care about my family company. Actually, the owners of his family company were on stage with him. So it was interesting because it's true that Spino Viva was used either by the socialists, either by the far right, to try to show to the Portuguese voters that this government, and especially Luís Montenegro, was not fit for the job. So his integrity was at stake. At least for Chega, it did work out, but not for the socialists. So actually, the socialists, they didn't benefit from the scandal at all. It was actually the opposite. But the campaign, of course, we had the Spino Viva issue. We did have migration. Maybe Vincent can talk a little bit more about that. I don't think that during the campaign, the different leaders from the different parties, they went into detail. They didn't go into detail. I don't think so. Even in terms of migration, when it comes to migration, we see, of course, that the far-right Chega is really pushing hard to discuss this issue, but they are not really discussing it. They are just, it's an amalgama, it's just a mix. And the other parties, I don't think they succeed in explaining their position on migration either. But this is how I see it. We also see that it was a quite vague campaign in the sense that we didn't see the parties discussing important things as what we are going to do to the healthcare system, or, for instance, they didn't discuss defense. We don't know what they think about this allegedly increase of defense that Portugal is supposed to do. It didn't discuss international politics, like the impact of the trade war. And today we had the spring forecast, and it's quite clear that there is an impact also for Portugal. We didn't have that in the campaign. So, and at some point, the campaign was really maybe political scientists and teachers at the university. They will try to explore this a bit and to try to understand what happened during the campaign, because at some point the campaign was totally was more about entertainment, in the sense that we were watching the journalists going after the prime minister to the beach, or going after Montenegro to the beach. It was playing a volleyball. It was swimming in the ocean. The journalists were asking questions about this, and at some point we were like, okay, what's going on? For instance, Pedro Nuno Santos, so the socialist leader, was riding his motorcycle. And the most interesting thing, it was probably what happened in this last 3 to 4 days of campaign, when at some point Ventura, so the far-right leader, he was using his health condition and he was exploiting it politically. So we felt he was not feeling okay. It was quite clear during a speech campaign. He was on stage, and at some point he felt ill. He went to the hospital. Once again, all the journalists and the TVs going after him, going live all the time. It was something that I've never seen before, to be honest. For the day after, he was okay. We know it was just a reflux, so he was not having an heart attack. It was not serious. He was just feeling not okay. But the day after, he decided, not the day after, but 2 days after, he decided, okay, I will insist. I will go to the streets. I will show that even if he was not feeling okay, he was trying to show that I'm here, I'm strong, I'm with the people. So a populist strategy, sure. Once again, he was feeling bad. So, and it was for me, and I was in Brussels. I was not there. I was not covering the election. At some point, I was really trying to understand what was going on from the political perspective, also from the media campaign coverage perspective. Even for journalists, I suppose, I'm not criticizing anybody. I'm just trying to. I know it's not easy when something happens like this. For journalists, it's not easy to react. But at some point, this is one of my questions. I would like to understand how badly, or how badly, but how all these situations during the campaign related to the health condition, going to the hospital, all this exploiting of this particular situation, how it influenced the results. Because for sure, we cannot avoid that. The far right is one of the main winners of the night. But maybe Vicente can speak more about that.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, of course, Vicente, I would like to ask you about your reading about the electoral results in general, about all parties, but also in particular about the far right. Of course, you're an expert on this topic, and one of the arguments that you make in your book is that it's not just that far right is convincing voters to their positions, but that a lot of people hold already these positions, but they're not voting for these far right parties because they're highly stigmatized, right? So once this social norm of not voting to these voters breaks down, the rise of these far right parties is relatively fast, and really strong. So is the rise of the far right in Portugal, is Chega a good example of this? Does it fit? Does it not? Can we make sense of the far right and the electoral results kind of in general?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to be here. I do think Chega is a good case to exemplify this normalization argument, because as you were saying, one of the implications of this theory that I put forward in the book is that the far right grows very fast and often in fairly unpredictable ways, precisely because it doesn't require people changing their views. It only requires being able to mobilize voters who had these views already, and that's much faster than convincing someone who had different views already. Chega is a very clear example of how fast the far right can grow. I mean, the party got 1% of the vote in 2019, 7 in 2022, 18 in 2024, and now probably something like 23%. We don't have the final result yet, but that's probably where they're landing. They might come in second in terms of MPs. We still don't know all of that. But anyways, I think it's very clear how fast this party is growing against the background of Portugal being often thought of as a country that seemed to be resisting the wave of far-right parties that was happening in the whole of Europe, etc. And at the same time, one of the other reasons why I think this is a case of normalization is that there was some survey evidence already before Chega even came into the equation that did suggest that Portuguese voters did hold views that were somewhat close to the far right. So racism, for example, has been comparatively very high in Portugal. That has been documented for quite a while, way before the far right ever had any success in the country. At the same time, some studies show that Portuguese voters were open to populist candidates, etc. So I do think this is a case of what I discuss in the book, which is the idea that there is a latent pool of voters who could be mobilized by the right type of candidate, but just for a while the country didn't have that right type, if you want to think about it that way. And the politicians that did exist were just not very skilled at their job and couldn't mobilize this latent pool of voters that did exist in that country. Of course, Ventura changes this because he's obviously very skilled at what he's doing. I think part of what Susana was talking about, and I completely share her view, showcases his skill, how he's so good at mobilizing the media, so good at being always talked about, so good at saying things that seem outrageous but that give him a lot of media attention. And so the moment that you have this type of candidate, he was able to pick up on these voters that had these views already but didn't have anyone to vote. So yeah, so this about the far right. I do agree with Susana that they were maybe the main winner of the night, or definitely among the main winners. I did want to talk a bit about the general election as well. So I think beyond the fact that the far right had a big win, I think this was also a fairly unexpected result. I mean, it wasn't unexpected that the center right would win. That's what most polls would say, but they did win by a larger margin than most polls were predicting. The center left did have a much worse result than most polls would suggest. And at the same time, the far right did better. So even though polls weren't that off in the specific vote share of most of these parties, when you put everything together, the outcome of the election is a bit different than what most of us would expect. And at the same time, I think an important story of the night is how much the country has swung to the right. So the center left was defeated. The leader of the party has resigned. And I think, this is a trend that we have witnessed in many European countries. The social democratic parties, actual social democratic parties, not nominally social democratic parties, as in center-left parties, increasingly struggle to win elections. In the case of Portugal, this party has their voters are the oldest among the Portuguese political landscape. So it's a party that is in a bit of a crisis. I think this is a very important defining moment for them. Who can they find to replace this leader? Can they go back to being competitive, or will they keep losing more and more votes? And at the same time, the right has something like 2/3 of the parliament. Again, there's some seats that haven't yet been allocated, so we don't know the exact numbers. But last time I checked, there were one MP away from having 2/3 of the parliament, and that's significant because that means they could, for example, amend the constitution if so they wish. And I think it's also significant just because that shows how powerful the right is in the country. So I think that is one of the main stories of the night. And the last thing I would like to say is also, I think there's a story about turnout here. Portugal was for many years a country where turnout was going continuously down. And in the last two elections, turnout has gone up, which is, I think, surprising if we consider what you said in the beginning, that there have been elections almost every year now. And there's a lot of work in political science to suggest that when you have such frequent elections, voters get uninterested by the election and they are much less likely to turn out. And yet, the truth is that even despite the high frequency in elections, that seems to not be demobilizing voters, and that's why they have gone to the polls at this high rate. So I think these were the main takeaways for me, but I'm happy to, of course, discuss these issues more as we go along.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Actually, I want to take the chance to press you both on this other story, which is the socialists, right? So why do you think they had this bad result, right? We were, of course, not expecting them to win. The polls didn't say that, but the result has been way worse than expected. They were in government not that long ago, so it's not like this is, a crisis that has been long, or at least not to the intensity that they will not, be able to achieve government. So what has happened? What do you think made the socialists not being that good? Is it the candidate? Of course, as you mentioned, the leader has resigned, so now the socialists are gonna enter this process of electing a new one. But what do you think happened there? What do you think happened? What are your hypotheses or main ideas on the left? Susana, and then maybe.
It's a very good question. I think the socialists, they are trying to answer to it right now. I think there are we have different possibilities or different explanations. I do think that the fact that we had the Socialist Party governing for 8 years is not helping. So I think this is one of the reasons why 1 year ago, PSD, so the center-right, and it's a coalition together with the conservatives, but it's mainly the center-right. That's one of the reasons why they win. So Antonio Costa is no longer there. Costa was the popular man inside the Socialist Party. Costa is no longer in Portugal. Actually, he could not even help Pedro Nuno Santos during the campaign because he's the president of the European Council. So he cannot just simply help a specific candidate. And we also know that Costa is not fond of Pedro Nuno Santos either. So they are not even from the same group inside of the Socialist Party. One other reason, or a different reason that has been also mentioned recently, is the fact that Pedro Nuno Santos, and we know him because he was minister of Costa, so he's not someone that is totally disconnected from what happened during the last three governments, or the last three socialist governments. It was also is someone that is also a little bit controversial in the sense that he was Minister for Infrastructures. He was dealing with TAP, so TAP, our airline company, and I don't think people have the best image of him. I'm not saying he's good or bad. I'm just saying he's not as popular as Costa is, and he's also very attached to the left. So he was the one 8 years ago helping Costa making all this. Because I'm just going back a little bit in time, but 8 years ago, when Costa had or formed his first government, he didn't win the election. Actually, it was second, but he managed to be at the parliament being backed by the left wing party, so left bloc, and the communists. And back then, Pedro Nuno was the man helping him in this endeavor. Like, he was the one really. He was closer to the left bloc. He was closer to the leftist policies. So he's still attached to that image. And if we look at what happened yesterday, and Vicente already mentioned it, that right now we have 2/3 of the parliament. 2/3 of the parliament are from the right. So, and it was not like that 8 years ago, and it was not even like that 1 year ago. So more and more, it's not, even last year, the right was already a majority, but now they have 2/3. And this also shows that at some point, maybe the voters were looking for something more in the center rather on the leftist part of the socialist party. So it's a possible. These are just possibilities. Yeah. I don't have a clear answer to that, but definitely he didn't succeed. That's for sure. And this new guy that is already challenging his job is more. It's inside of the Socialist Party. Is more to the center, so he's closer to the center. So let's see if it helps, but. Of course, at some point as well, people were a bit tired of all these years with the Socialist Party.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Vicente. Do you want to add something or?
So the first thing I want to say is I completely agree with the point about it's hard for you to be the alternative when you have been in government for such a long time and so recently. So I fully agree with that point, and I think that's the main story here. I want to add I want to add 2 points to that. I think there's also, I think there's a secular trend aspect to this, so a very long-term element to what happened, and then I think there's an election-specific element to what happened. I think that the very long trend is something that we see across Europe, which is that this, as I was saying before, the center-left parties are struggling in many countries. They are struggling to have a clear message. They are struggling to mobilize voters, and so to a large extent, as my colleague Tariq Abou-Jadi, for example, has argued, these parties keep winning votes because there's some sectors of the electorate that have always voted for them and keep voting, but that is a model that is going to fail eventually because these parties are also have an electorate that is very old, so they're literally running out of these electors, and the new people who are joining the electorate typically will vote for other parties. So this is the long-term secular trend. And on top of that, I think there is an election-specific aspect. Of course, again, on top of what Susana said, I think this campaign, to a large extent, was a struggle between two different narratives about what had happened, as in what had led to the previous government to fall. The right-wing narrative was that this was a crisis of government, that they were a minority government, and that the center left simply stopped supporting them, and that's why the government fell. And then the left argument was that was not the case, and this was just a stunt by the prime minister to try and shift attention away from the whole corruption scandal. I think what we saw yesterday does suggest that the right-wing narrative was much more successful, because the right seems to have had a very good result and the left obviously had a very bad one. But I think the fact that this happened this way should also ring alarm bells for the socialists even more, because it should have been a fairly easy campaign to make. There was a corruption scandal. I think at face value for most voters, it's hard not to see how problematic much of what Montenegro had done seems to be, and of course the challenges that this presents for the future, as Susana was also saying before. And yet the fact that the socialists cannot hit a home run under these very favorable conditions, even considering that they have been the government recently, I think should really sound the alarm bell. And I think they are probably going to have a moment of reckoning and a bit of an identity crisis. But I really think, as I said before, this is a very important moment for them, because if they cannot go back to being one of the main parties in the country in the next election, they might never be able to do that again.
Very important message for the socialists. Okay, so let's move on to, and then we'll come back to a couple of these issues in the questions. But let's move on to what's going to happen. So, if I'm not mistaken, a coalition government, a majority can only be reached by two of the three big parties. So it's not enough that one of the big parties allies with other small ones, meaning that the choices are very stark. So, Susana, what do you think is going to happen in terms of election? I mean, obviously, probably Montenegro is going to repeat as prime minister, but with whom? And do you think it's going to take long? Do you think the instability of Portugal is going to go away or not?
Well, I think there are two different questions. One is the new government, because I don't think it's the same thing. We might have a government without stability. So we don't have, as you know, we don't have a tradition of coalitions in Portugal. Even when Costa was backed by the left bloc and the communists, it was not a coalition. So it was the government was only the Socialist Party ruling, actually. And I don't think Montenegro is looking for a partner either. So, well, to be honest, if we take his campaign, what it was saying it was repeatedly asking during the campaign is "let me work." So it was "deixem o Luís trabalhar," so let Luís work. So, and that's what he's asking: "Let me work," in the sense that he wants to govern alone, and he expects. This is pretty clear. He expects the socialists to help him out, so not to make his life that hard. And we already know that in the past, in the last year, the Socialist Party did help him, because that's how he got a budget approved, and he survived to I don't know how many non-confidence votes either. So, and also to elect the president of the parliament, it was also the socialists it was also Pedro Santos that helped him out in this thing. So I do think he's expecting exactly the same, but now his argument is even stronger, because he can say, "I won the elections, you are weaker, so just don't stay in the way." And this is how I read it. And in terms of the far right, so far he has said, and once again he repeated, he said it too many times, so I want to believe that he's not going to change his mind, but we never know, that no means no to Chega. So he said, "I'm not going to govern with Chega." Nevertheless, we know that everything can happen. So I don't think he's going to form a coalition. I don't think that's a scenario. But we cannot exclude that in October, when they are at the moment where they are negotiating or trying to approve a new budget, it might need Chega. So it's true that for him, he only needs the Socialist Party to abstain in order to have a budget, but we don't know what's going to happen, and that's why I was telling you that stability is a different thing. one thing is for sure, we cannot have elections until May next year, because we cannot have elections in the next 6 months. Then we will have presidential elections. So we will, in January, we must choose a new president of the Portuguese Republic. And during the 6 last months of the president's mandate, we cannot call for elections. So we know for sure that the next president will so he will start being president in March next year. So if in case we have a new collapse of government, in case we don't have, for instance, a budget, so we have to wait at least 1 year. So the main question for the socialists is, what do I gain from blocking a budget in October? Because if they block the budget, Portugal will be, of course, you can survive. You can live, as you are Spanish, so you know it. Of course, you can survive without a budget. But of course, politically, it's, of course, more difficult. And taking into account the political, the global, also the global situation and this trade war and everything, of course, it's better if you have one. So I do think that Montenegro is still counting on that. So at least for 1 year, I think this is what's going to happen. I might be wrong. I don't know. And you were also mentioning, just to finish, it's true that for the socialists, this was a big defeat. And if we look at what happened in France before, it might happen in Portugal as well. So at some point, the Socialist Party can just be irrelevant. But don't forget that in February, we also had elections in Germany, and the far right was second, and the Socialist Party was third. But of course, Germany, they have this tradition of coalition. A great coalition is not a big deal for them. And if we look at the results of the Socialist Party, SPD, in Germany, it was not, they didn't do better, but they managed to be in the government. The Socialist Party in Portugal will not manage to that. But they also have an argument that I think it's interesting, because every time we talk about the Great Coalition in Germany, sometimes we think, okay, every time you make a great coalition, who is the opposition? Who is in charge of the opposition? Who is the opposition leader? And right now, it's, of course, you have the Greens in Germany, but the main opposition party is AFD. And now what you have in Portugal, you still don't know, because we are still expecting the results from some constituencies outside of Portugal, but it doesn't matter. It's for either the Socialist Party second or third, it doesn't matter, because at some point, one of them will have to be the opposition leader. And this is something that is really, really hard for the Socialist Party, more than anything, because if they decide to support the budget, they can say, well, we will support the budget because we are thinking about the country. But then, what is happening with the far right? And this is one of the main questions that Pedro Nuno was already struggling with. That's why last year he was not fond of passing the budget, but in the end he did. And now this is still a big question.
Yes. Yeah. Very, very, very interesting points. Vicente, do you want to add something on the kind of government formation and or kind of how this might change the policy priorities that the government of Portugal is implementing?
Yes. Again, I second everything that Susana said. I'll insist a bit more on some points, but I don't think this is actually in any way different than what she said. I do think, so one first thing that I want to say, which builds up, I think, from what she said, is that on top of the socialists having nothing to win from not allowing a government, I think they will also look back and think that the fact that they let the government fall now probably hurt them in this election. And so they will have to think very carefully if they want to do that again in the future. So on top of all this discussion about there being other elections, you cannot have another one soon. Even if that was out of the equation, I think they would still be much more skeptical about whether it would be a good idea. So I think they have no legitimacy now to not support some type of government from Montenegro. That's my reading. But on the far right question, I mean, I do think, again, Montenegro has said repeatedly that no means no, as Susana was saying. I think that at least in a first moment, he will stand by it. I am not so confident that over the long term, the center right will never have some type of agreement with the far right. I personally think that is bound to happen sooner or later in some, in some way. That doesn't mean that the far right is officially in government or anything like that. But I think some type of agreement sooner or later is going to feel inevitable. But it could be with a different leader than not Montenegro, depending on how things go for him. I do think his first attempt will be to have a minority government again, because he has come out very strong of this election. So I think he has, very good conditions to do that. But that doesn't mean that the far right doesn't have other ways of influencing the government. The center right was already moving rightwards when it comes to migration, etc. And now with the far right having this such a strong electoral result, I think that's going to happen even more. And as Susana was also saying, I think in some way this is the ideal the ideal situation for the far right. They don't have to govern. They don't need to actually make the mistakes that you make as you govern, but they are the main party or one of the main parties in the opposition. And at the same time, they might be able to influence the minority government to move closer to their position. So all of these things will, in principle, be very good for them in a next election. So I would argue that for them, it's even better to be in this position than to actually be in the government where, you have, there's some erosion of political capital and all of that for these parties that are mainly opposition parties.
Yeah, very, very interesting, very interesting. Thank you very much. I mean, coming from Spain, is very interesting to see the coalitions, right? Because in Spain it would be unthinkable that the center left and center right collaborate. Once that did happen, it nearly broke the Socialist Party. But this is, of course, increasingly a choice that Socialist Party are having to make in a lot of European countries. And with that comment, we get now into the European dimension. And actually, with a lot of the questions are actually about that from the audience. So I want to start with Susana on how do you think the probable, more than probable continuity of Montenegro impacts the EU. I'm guessing that at the EU level they can more or less breathe with regards to Romania and with regards to Portugal in terms of government. Do you think this has a specific impact within EU policies and EU politics, or would we see more kind of continuity? Well, how do you think it impacts the different policies?
I think it's more continuity. I don't see a big change here. So, to be honest, at the EU level, you don't see a big change. Even if you compare to Antonio Costa and with Montenegro now, because the truth is that the Socialist Party and PSD, they are not far away from each other. So they are not really apart from each other when it comes to the EU affairs. So, of course, for instance, let's think. Now we are supposed to, or the Commission is supposed to put forward the revision of the return regulation. So in terms of migration, probably a PSD-led government, so a center-right-led government, for sure it's going to be tougher in terms of migration, or probably will be more aligned with those countries that think that we should have a tougher stance of migration. And I'm talking about EPP parties. I'm thinking about Germany, but of course Italy is not EPP, but still they also have a tougher stance regarding these. And of course, but this is not because of Portugal that is going to change or be tougher. This is EPP. EPP is in charge of the European Council. So, to be honest, the fact that Montenegro stays, it's one more seat for the EPP. So we should expect. That's what we should expect. So it's not a big deal over there. Of course, we also have the negotiations of the next MFF. it's true that quite often the PSD, so the center right, it's a little bit weird. I know it's weird to say PSD, especially because it in Europe, PSD, they are the Social Democrats, they are from the left side, but in Portugal, PSD is from the center-right side. But so PSD quite often was criticizing Costa and the socialist government because they were all the time asking the European Union to give more money to Portugal. So quite often they were saying, well, it's time to put an end to this policy where we are always asking for more money. We are subsidy dependent, or we are dependent on grants. We should change our policy and the way we behave. Nevertheless, the last thing I heard from Prime Minister Montenegro was saying that, well, we are in favor of increasing the national contributions. We are in favor of increasing the EU budget. We are in favor of new Eurobonds in the sense, or a new recovery fund for defense, so common joint borrowing. So you see, even if it seems there are some nuances or some differences, in the end, I don't think Prime Minister Montenegro will arrive at the MFF negotiation and say, "Look, we don't want the money. We don't want the cohesion funds. We don't want more money for Portugal." So I don't see a big difference there, and I also think this is kind of interesting to. And I don't see Of course, Chega for sure will put a pressure and will influence this government when it comes to internal politics. But I don't think Chega is enough for the time being to push the government to a different direction in terms of EU politics.
Perfect, thank you. And I want to ask Vicente to a double question, which actually is the one I want to ask, but a lot of people have asked this in the questions. So number one is, of course, placing this result, particularly of the far right, within broader context of the European far right and the elections that we had in Portugal and Romania. Is this, it's just the unstoppable rise of the far right, or what is going on in that regard? And then the second question I also want to ask you, very related to this, about the Trump effect, right? So how is Trump, how much do you think it played within Portuguese election and within the far right elections? There's some people who argue at the beginning that Trump would embolden the far right, then Trump started implementing his policies and tariffs on Ukraine, and then there are people arguing, no, this might be kind of quite detrimental to the far right. I must say that a colleague and I checked the data, and we were not so sure we saw any very strong effect either way. Yeah. But how do you think Trump is affecting, or could affect in the future, the far right in Portugal and in Europe?
I mean, I'll start with that. As much as we know from evidence in political science, voters don't care that much about international affairs until they really have to care about them, right? Of course, if there's a war or an invasion, suddenly international affairs affect your daily life. Beyond that, typically they vote on things that affect their daily lives much more, like economics, migration, housing crisis, these types of issues. So I would agree with your reading that I think much of this has been overstated, how much Trump can have an effect in one direction or the other, to be honest. There is some work to suggest that previously elections by Donald Trump had an effect, but I think those effects happened against the background where the far right was much less consolidated than it is now. I think now they are a mainstream in the sense that they are an established actor in most European societies, and I think to the extent that something like the Trump presidency can have an effect, it's going to be a very marginal effect, I think. Again, unless something much more catastrophic, much more important happens. But so far, everything that has happened, I would guess, has not such a strong effect. Now, to the question about the wave, yes, I mean, we see there's a lot of variation within cases and from one election to the other. But if we take one step back and we look at vote shares in the last few decades, what seems obvious is that the far right keeps growing. Now, of course, the question is how far are they going to grow? For a while, the consensus in political science was that these parties could grow until something like 10, 15, sometimes 20% of the vote, and then they would stabilize and they would have a hard time growing even more. And I think this was true in many countries for quite a long time, but in recent years, we have seen them break through that share of the vote and start winning elections in increasingly more countries. So it's still an open question how much these parties can grow, to what extent they can make to governments. They have in some countries, but can they make it in other countries where they haven't? And to what extent the moment when they start having governmental positions and start being in coalitions and all of that will actually make people stop voting for them? That doesn't seem to be the case so far. So it's all an open-ended question. So far, it seems that these parties are just growing in popularity everywhere. In that sense, I think Portugal, as we said in the beginning, Portugal used to be a country that was seen as immune to this type of parties, and I think very rapidly it has picked up with many trends that exist throughout Europe, namely the strength of the far right, the fact that the center left is struggling with having a narrative, the fact that the country is much more polarized. It is true that it's different than Spain, as you said, because there's still some willingness to have understandings between the center left and the center right, but even that can change very fast. I think the moment that the center right is willing to have some type of agreement with the center right, that will break that possibility, I think, very fast, and you could very quickly be in a position that is closer to Spain. So all of this to say that in a way, Portugal went from being an exception to now being a very exemplary case for what is happening throughout Europe.
Yeah, I completely agree. I want to remind everyone that they can ask their questions now. We have several questions already, so that's good. But you can ask your questions, ask away, ask anything that you guys wanna know. So please take the opportunity now. Susana, I want to ask you something. There was one question and about something you mentioned at the beginning, although you can, of course, intervene on the far right or any other comment that Vicente has made, but about TV editors. So there's a comment talking about TV editors not making politics cover an entertainment show. So this is particularly regards to health, the situation of health, of the health of several candidates, which has been a major element over the past days regarding Ventura. So how much responsibility, or do you think there's something positive or wrong with the way that we cover politics that may be helping political stability or certain parties more than others? How do you see the role of the media with all of this?
So this is something that at some point the traditional media, I mean TVs and newspapers, should start asking themselves. So I don't think I have a clear answer for that. But as a journalist, I ask this myself. So because I have this feeling that we are losing a battle to the social media, and this campaign also showed that the leaders, the party leaders, it doesn't matter if they are from the right or the left, if they are right or left, they are more interested in show up on social media than giving interviews to journalists, and they are more interested in giving interviews to comedians, to entertainment shows, rather than giving interviews to newspapers and TV stations. So we had it. It's more and more. It's even yesterday. I was watching TV, of course, and I was following the different TV channels and the electoral night. And at some point, because you have this tradition where you have the leader, and I'm thinking about Ventura, but also it happened also with Montenegro. It comes to this campaign headquarters, and he speaks to his supporters, and at some point he says, okay, now the press can ask 3 questions. And suddenly my colleagues there, they were asking questions, and we could listen to the supporters just making noise. So it was like bullying the journalists. And I did see that happening with during the Montenegro's intervention, but also it also happened with the far right. But of course, we also have to think: were you as a and it probably this is more for the TV stations, but not only. Was it correct to follow Ventura wherever he was going? It's not an easy. I hope my boss is not listening to me right now. No, I'm just asking the question because it's not easy to take a decision, and at some point we think something is going to happen. So of course we have to follow him, and because in Portugal we have this 24 hours news channel, we are live all the time, and hours and hours and hours. But of course, at some point we have to ask ourselves what is our own. I'm not sure it's our own responsibility, but what's our own impact, and to think about it. And maybe we come to the conclusion that we did everything right. Maybe we come to the conclusion that we didn't. But it's not only, of course, now I'm going to defend the media outlets, and just to finish, Valentim was mentioning it before. So in 2019, Ventura got 1 seat in the parliament. And then he went to 12, 15, now 58. But in 2019, it was not the only new party, or it was not the only one gaining a new seat. So back then in 2019, 3 different parties for the first time got seats, 1 seat each. So it was 1 seat for the far right, 1 seat for the Liberals, 1 seat for PAN, which is a green party. You see, and the way and people, they have a choice, right? So they had the choice to vote for Ventura, for the far right, for the Greens, for the Liberals. And when we see what happened after that, we see that for the far right, they just skyrocket. So at some point now they are 58, and the Liberals, they are 8, PAN only 1. And now we have a new party there, but it doesn't matter. But you see, so this is also that at some point we have to think that it's not only about the media effect. Something is going on, and maybe also the audience, the voters, they should probably maybe they are just happy with the result.
Yeah. No, very, very good point on how 3 new parties get into the parliament. Who gets the media attention? There's a couple of questions. There are 2 groups of questions from the audience. So one group is on questions on the normalization and the mainstreaming of the far right. I'm gonna ask again this question to both of you, and the other is on the left, on the far left. So the socialists didn't have such a good result, but what about the left to the left? So the first group of questions on the far right is about is Portugal a case of mainstreaming of mainstream parties adopting far right views and then this normalizing further kind of far right parties? Number 1, and then number 2, what about the role of civil society? So in particular, there's a question that I found very interesting about the evangelical Christian churches and organizations, right? So this is something that is a growing issue in Europe, much more pronounced in Latin America. So what about civil society organizations that are more far right, but particularly evangelical churches? I don't know if you have any comment on that. And then again, to both of you, what has happened to the left of the left? So here we saw that Libre, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing this, increased their vote share, right? So among this left, if they were, a bit better. So what are they doing differently that is benefiting them? And then what about, of course, the Communist Party and the Bloco de Esquerras, which I remember seeing this from Spain and the discussion we had on Podemos, how important this party was and what is happening with that now. So what is happening, kind of both to mainstreaming of the far right and to the left of the Socialist Party? I don't know who wants to start, but. Maybe Vicente? Or...
Yes, I'm happy to go first. I'll take those in order. I'll start with the normalization. So it's definitely a case where the center right has moved further to the right, especially over this last I wouldn't say year, but I would say last few months, where PSD suddenly started talking much more about migration, started making decisions on migration be talked about much more, and that is, I think it's fair to read that as a move to the right on that topic. I think there's also a broader discussion that the party has about law and order and all of that kind of resembles the positions that are a bit more typical of the far right. Of course, whether that has in this case normalized and made the far right do better is a question that we could only answer with data that we don't have at this point. What I can say is, in other contexts that have been studied by me and other people, that seems to have worked that way. So I think there is an argument to say that probably when the center right does it in Portugal, it might definitely have the same effect. But it's hard to say right now if that was the case for an election that happened yesterday. It definitely is the case that the center right has moved further to the right. It's definitely the case that can have this effect, but whether it did have that effect yesterday is still a bit hard to know. I'm not a specialist on civil society, so I would maybe leave that question to Susana if she has something to say about it, or otherwise we can maybe come back to it later. I'm happy to talk a bit more broadly, but I'm not the expert to go to on this specific topic. I do. There is something that I might say about the left. I mean, actually, I'm glad this came up because I think that's another story of the night. Maybe not the first that comes to mind because we talk more about bigger parties, but it is true that the left as a whole, apart from Livre, came out defeated, and the parties to the left of the socialists, again with the exception of Livre, basically close to disappeared. And there was, for a long time during the night, it was unclear whether some of these parties would actually make it to parliament or not. So it is definitely a big defeat for them, and it raises questions about to what extent they will keep existing and can they make it to parliament again in upcoming elections. I think one explanation. So I think there's two sets of explanations here. One is the left as a whole was defeated, and in much the same way that the socialists were defeated, smaller parties were also defeated because there was just a move away from left-wing parties, and bigger and smaller parties alike suffered from that. I think there's also a story among smaller parties about how Livre just seems to be a bit more successful in this historical period in capturing votes by left-wing people who do not want to vote for the socialists. I think the party has a narrative that is not that different from the socialists, meaning that they can capture some younger voters who would maybe otherwise move to the socialists, but maybe are a bit more leftist and would now move to Livre. So they can capture votes from the socialists in a way that I think other parties struggle a bit more because they're a bit farther to the left. And they just have, I think, a younger and more positive message. I think really part of what makes Livre successful is that they, in a historical period of so much negativity, where the whole discourse is about negative emotions, they are able to elaborate a positive message that has some resonance with voters. And I actually think, they could start becoming a problem for the socialists very quickly if the socialists keep losing voters. Again, because it's not such a big ideological jump to go from the socialists to Livre. There is a scenario where suddenly Livre starts capturing a lot of the socialist votes. And then we know that people vote also based on expectations of what others will do. And so if a lot of people start fleeing the socialists to move to Livre, this could be something that happens. I'm not saying it's very likely, but I'm saying it's definitely something that could happen. And we have seen it happen in other countries. So I think the story is about how Livre managed to have a kind of a rebranded, newer version of fairly centrist left-wing politics that was able to capture on younger voters that wouldn't vote for the socialists, but maybe are not so far to the left that they would vote for other parties. And so they basically captured all the vote that stayed on the left but didn't want to move to the more far left parties.
Yeah, thank you. Susana, do you want to add something to end the...
It's on social society. I don't have much to say either. So, but it's what Vicente just said about Livre, so this tiny party from the left that actually managed to survive and to get bigger. And so we don't. The Communist Party, it's something that it's not new. They've been losing supporters for quite a long time. We also see this is very interesting because villages and cities that before were they were really like how do you call it, Bastião? I'm losing the word. So that, yeah, thank you. So places where they were winning and really being strong, now they belong to Chega. So you see these supporters that used to, or these Portuguese people that used to vote for the communists that now are voting for Chega. So it's something that we are. I think even in Portugal are still trying to understand what are the flows. So what's happening? Who was used to vote for communists now and why? But the reasons are a bit the same. But it's true that everybody in Portugal now got more emotional about migration. And still, probably we are not, this is also my personal opinion, I'm not ignoring what people complain about, because I'm also going to Portugal and I listen to my friends and to people I know and whatever. So, and of course there is something changing in Portugal. I can just give you the example of my hometown. I'm from a tiny village in Portugal, and 5 years ago, we only had Portuguese people living there, and now we have migrants. But I can also tell you that the companies in the region, they need these migrants. But it's also a question of perception. So maybe we have to listen to the people, and we also have to explain what's going on. And but the parties are not explaining. Nobody's explaining. And so you just have this big mess, and we have these incredible results.
Well, I mean, thank you very much. With that, we've run out of time. I think the discussion was very interesting. There's so many more points I would have liked to raise, but luckily, and I want to say this, that we answered most of the people's the audience questions, so that's good. There's some person who argued that, well, also there's this Europeanist dimension with Livre, that maybe in a way that they're Europeanist in a way that Bloco de Esquerra, for example, is not, and that might also play a dimension, talking about this European dimension of the election. But I wanted to thank you very much for participating and for making the time. I think it's very interesting. I encourage everyone to follow Vicente and Susana. Follow the work. It's very interesting. Of course, we will organize more European elections monitors, and have a happy Monday. And thank you very much for joining.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Let's wait. Give me a moment. Miriam?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, should we? Can you stop the
Yeah, of course.
event? Well, thank you very much. I'm not sure we've stopped completely or not. Apologies for this, but I think it's just